Lecture 1.
Okay, the topic of today's lecture is there anybody out there? And of course, by that phrase, is there anybody out there, I am referring to extraterrestrial life, to aliens, as many of you are sure to know. There was a conference in 1948, at which time an Italian physicist, Enrico Fermi, when discussing the possibilities of extraterrestrial life, suddenly blurted out, "Well, where are they?" Meaning, where are the aliens? Where are the extraterrestrials? Now, by extraterrestrial, I mean extra, beyond, and terrestrial, Earth. So beings beyond Earth. And Fermi's question of where are the aliens has come to be known as Fermi's paradox. In other words, if there is extraterrestrial life in the universe, why haven't we found it yet? Aliens should have in fact visited us by now if they are in fact out there. Now, some people will think that the pyramids in Egypt were built by aliens, but most real scientists don't think we've been visited yet. So, the question we need to ask to think through Fermi's paradox of where are the aliens is approximately how many extraterrestrials, civilizations might there be, which would be people who might be able to visit us. How many aliens might there be in the galaxy? And there's actually a man by the name of Dr. Francis Drake, who in 1961 came up with something called the Drake equation. He attempted to give a way of thinking about how many extraterrestrial civilizations there might be. So, to give you an abridged version, a simplified version of the equation. Now, an equation is just a mathematical sentence stating that two expressions are equal. So, for example, 5 equals 2 plus 3 is an equation. Or, Einstein's famous E equals mc squared is an equation. Now, the Drake equation is trying to answer the question of how many extraterrestrial civilizations are there in our galaxy. And you may want to write this down as I give it to you, because it will be on our exam. N equals n sub p times f sub life times f sub civ times f sub now. N stands for the number of civilizations in the Milky Way, our galaxy, equals n sub p. Sub p simply means a subscript p on the right side of the letter. F sub life, a lowercase f, is equal to the number of planets with life. Now, to have life, the planets must be in what's known as the habitable zone, an area of the solar system near the sun or a star where the conditions for supporting life exist. Often in astronomy, we refer to this as the Goldilocks zone, in reference to the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where, as many of you will know, she kept trying all of the things that belong to the bears, from their porridge to their beds, until she found the item that was just right or best for her. In the solar system, we need the distance from the star to be just right in order for life to form on a planet. So we often look for planets in this Goldilocks zone as potential places for life to develop. For example, Venus, Earth, and Mars are thought to be in the Goldilocks zone of our solar system. Only the Earth has developed life so far. Now, f sub civ, the lowercase f signifying fraction, is the fraction of planets with civilizations. So civ stands for civilizations. So first you have to have planets, then you have to have planets with life. Then you have to have planets which develop civilizations. The final term, f sub now means the fraction of planets with civilizations that exist now. Because if someone is going to try to visit us, their civilization has to be active now. If it perished many, many years ago, or if it hasn't developed a civilization yet, then it's probably not going to come visit us. So again, the Drake equation is basically the number of civilizations in the Milky Way equal the number of planets, n sub p, times the fraction of planets with life, f sub life, times the fraction of planets with civilizations, f sub civ, times the fraction of civilizations that exist now, f sub now. Okay, and this is known as the Drake equation. Now, Drake himself estimated that there are about 10,000, what he would call, communicative civilizations in the Milky Way. So, 10,000 possible civilizations that are able to contact us. Which brings us back to Farabi's paradox, which we mentioned at the beginning. Well, where are the aliens? If there are 10,000 potential civilizations to contact us, where are they? There are three possible answers to Fermi's paradox. The first is just that the civilizations are not common. Maybe we're the first. The galaxy is about 10 billion years old, and Earth is about 5 billion years old, and yet the human civilization has only been around for a little while. In fact, we only really entered the space age 50 years ago. So maybe civilizations just aren't very common. Or maybe because civilizations aren't so common, lots of star systems remain unexplored. So maybe there are alien civilizations out there, but they just haven't gotten around to exploring our neighborhood yet. So that's just the first possible answer. The second possible answer is that these civilizations, these extraterrestrial civilizations, don't leave their home worlds. And there might be two reasons for this. One, maybe they're just uninterested in interstellar travel. We've only been to the moon, and as a matter of fact, some people are even saying that maybe we shouldn't even send a man on space explorations anywhere. Maybe we should just have robots and things. So maybe people just are uninterested in space travel. Or the second reason, a bit darker possibly, is that maybe civilizations destroy themselves before they achieve interstellar travel. And again, just looking at ourselves, we have the capacity for space travel, but we also have the capacity for massive world destruction with nuclear weapons and things. So maybe civilizations that could have visited us already have already destroyed themselves. The third possible answer, which in my mind is the most interesting, is that civilizations exist, but maybe they're leaving us alone on purpose. That is, there is someone out there are aliens out there, and they have decided that we're just not interesting enough to visit. Maybe we are not evolved enough to be interesting. For example, would you travel to Alaska to look at some bacteria? To try to communicate with bacteria? Well, probably not. It's probably not very interesting. There's more interesting places to go. For that reason, maybe there are civilizations that exist, but maybe they're just waiting until we develop further. That was a bit about Fermi's paradox and the Drake equation.
Please answer the questions found on the internet browser for this lecture. You will have 5 minutes to complete the questions before the next lecture starts. Submit your answers, but do not go beyond the next page until the following lecture is finished. Lecture 2.
Let's talk about the concept of choice and how it is deeply rooted in the culture that we grow up in. A while ago, I was doing research in Japan. While I knew that there would be cultural differences and misunderstandings, they constantly popped up in places where I least expected them. For instance, once, when at a restaurant, I wished to order a cup of green tea with sugar. The waiter politely refused, telling me that one does not put sugar in their tea. Upon further requesting the same thing, the manager was involved, this time telling me the restaurant had no sugar. Not being able to order my sweet tea, I decided to order coffee instead, which came with a packet of sugar. This incident was not due to misunderstanding, but to differences in our concepts of choice. Americans tend to have the perspective that a paying customer, upon making a reasonable request, should have that request met. One need only look at the mottos of Burger King, "Have it your way," or Starbucks, "Happiness is in your choices," to see this. The Japanese perspective was different, though. They wanted to protect me from my ignorance when I asked for something inappropriate according to their cultural standards. My point is that Americans seem to think that all humans have an innate and universal desire for choice. However, I would like to show you, by discussing 3 different assumptions, how this is not the case and doesn't even hold true within our own borders. Assumption number 1 states that if a choice affects you, then you should be the one to make it. In the US, the individual is the primary locus of choice. You have to be true to yourself, no matter what other people suggest. But do we benefit from this approach to choice? I did a study examining this question. 7 to 9-year-old Americans of European descent and Asian Americans were put into 2 groups. Group 1 was shown 6 piles of puzzles and were given the choice of which puzzle to do and which marker to use. Group 2 were told which puzzle they would do and which marker they would use. Anglo-Americans did 2.5 times better than Asian Americans when they were given the choice of which puzzle and which markers. In contrast, Asian American children performed best when someone chose for them. Immigrant children had a higher sense of community, and they preferred to let those they trusted and respected make the choice for them. Thus, our first assumption only holds for those whose culture encourages a self that is clearly separated or divided from others. Those who come from a culture that values collective choices may find individual choice might have a negative effect on performance. Assumption 2 says, the more choices you have, the more likely you are to make the best one. Stores like Walmart have 100,000 different products, and Amazon.com has 27 million different books. You'll surely choose the best product or book when all of the possibilities available. However, if we test this assumption, we see that this isn't necessarily the case. In one study, a person interviewed in Eastern Europe who were residents in formerly communist countries. The people were offered a set of 7 different drinks, including Coke, Diet Coke, Sprite, so on. During the first session, participants made comments saying that the drink choice did not matter. It was all just soda to them. Asking them how many choices there were among the drinks, they all said there was just 1. When juice and water were added to the 7 soda choices, they said that they had 3 choices: juice, water, and soda. Of course, this is not the case in the United States, where we often have a die-hard devotion to a particular flavor or brand of soda. Modern Americans are exposed to more choices and more ads with options than anyone else in the world. Choice is not only about what the product is for us, but also about who we are. Add this to the assumption that more choices are better, and you have a group of people who believe that every little difference matters. So every little choice matters. However, Eastern Europeans were suddenly flooded with choices. When asked what words or images they thought about when thinking about choice, one individual said he associated choice with fear, since he was used to having no choice. there was too much there in the new market, and many were finding them artificial. You can see that in reality, many choices between things are not that different, and that the value of choice depends on our abilities to perceive these differences. Though all humans share a basic desire for choice, we do not see it in the same way. When one has not been trained to see these differences, the presence of so many choices can be frustrating and confusing. Instead of guaranteeing that we make the best choice, we become overwhelmed by choice and sometimes even fear it. This can even happen with Americans who have been found to make poorer choices and decisions when given 10 or more options. This leads to the third and final assumption. You must never say no to choice. This is another problematic assumption. To examine this, let's compare people in the US and people in France. In the US, let's say we have a couple, Susan and Daniel, who are about to have their first baby. One night, when Susan is 7 months pregnant, she has to have an emergency C-section. The baby suffered a loss of oxygen and was unable to breathe on her own. The doctors gave the couple a choice. They could remove the baby from life support, which could cause her to die in a matter of hours, or they could keep her on life support and she could live without being able to walk or talk. In a study of American and French parents, all parents had suffered this tragedy, and in all cases, life support was removed and the baby died. There was a big difference in both places, though. In France, the doctors decided if the baby was taken off life support. But in America, the choice rested with the parents. It was found that this decision had an effect on parents' abilities to cope with their loss. Americans expressed more negative feelings than French parents did. French parents were likely to say things like, "Noah was here for so little time, but he taught us so much." American parents, on the other hand, were likely to ask, "What if?" Some parents even felt that they played a role in an execution. But when American parents were asked if they would rather the doctor made the choice, they all said no, even though the choice made them feel guilty, angry, and depressed. The parents could simply not think about giving up their choice because it would go against everything they had learned. The story of the American dream is a story of limitless choice. Freedom, happiness, success, they are all based on choice, and therefore a large number of choices are necessary. However, when we take a closer look, as we have seen, the story starts to show holes. And you see that it can be told in different ways based on the culture we belong to. No single narrative serves the needs of everyone, everywhere, and it can be seen that Americans could benefit from taking new perspectives and putting them into their own narrative. Robert Frost once said, "It is poetry that is lost in translation," suggesting that what is beautiful and moving cannot be communicated in different languages. However, Joseph Brodsky said, "It is poetry that is gained in translation," suggesting that translation can be a creative and transformative act. When it comes to choice, we gain a lot from engaging and translating other narratives so that we can open ourselves to a wider understanding of what choices can do. Doing so will help us to more fully see choice in all its complexity and beauty.
Please answer the questions found on the internet browser for this lecture. You will have 5 minutes to complete the questions before the next lecture starts. Submit your answers, but do not go beyond the next page until the following lecture is finished. Lecture 3.
Today we're going to discuss what it means for a person to be good or just from two different philosophical backgrounds, classical philosophy and deontology. If we're going to discuss goodness and justice, what makes an individual good or a society just or virtuous, then we need to start with the ancient Greeks. So we'll start with Plato's philosophy. Now, some of you may have studied Plato's philosophy in some other course, so this might be easy. Okay, at the risk of boring you, let me give you an overview of Plato's ethical theory. Plato says that the soul has, and by soul, he simply means that which animates the body, gives it life. Anyway, he says the soul has three separate parts, called faculties, which I'll come back to. He believes that goodness in an individual was found when these three parts of the soul work together, when they weren't in conflict, but existed in harmony. A good or just person will have a soul where the three faculties work well together. So how does he arrive at that analysis? Well, he starts out in his very famous work, The Republic, by saying that it's very difficult to get a grasp on what the individual soul looks like. So, to get some idea of what the individual human soul is like, he says we should study the structure of society. What kinds of people and activities every society has to have. He argues that every society has to have three groups of people: workers, soldiers, and leaders. And each has sort of a defining characteristic. Every society has to have workers, like farmers or people who work in factories, producing all the things that we need for everyday life. And according to Plato, the key feature of workers is that they're focused on their own desires or appetites, interested in satisfying the needs of the body. So workers are associated with desire. Now, if you live in a society that has a good amount of wealth, good agriculture, good industry, other societies are probably going to try to take it. So you need a class of soldiers who are supposed to protect the state from external threats. These soldiers are going to be in dangerous situations quite frequently, so you need people with a lot of spirit, an emotional type of individual. Emotion is what characterizes that group. And then Plato says that the third group you need is leaders. Their main role will be to think rationally, to use their reason or intellect to make decisions. As decision makers, leaders determine what the state is to do, how the affairs of the citizens are to be run. Plato then asks himself, okay, assume we've got such a society with these three groups. When will this society be a good and just society? Well, you can only have a good society when its three parts are working well together, each doing its proper thing. And Plato believes this can only happen if workers and soldiers learn moderation or self-control. But why? Why do workers and soldiers have to learn self-control? Well, how can a society flourish if the workers and soldiers don't control their desires and emotions? Plato thinks that if they aren't under control, workers will sleep too much and play too much. So they're not going to get their jobs done. And soldiers need to channel their high-spiritedness in a certain direction, precisely by being courageous. But you're not going to get that automatically. You need to teach them this kind of moderation. So you need an educational system that will first of all train leaders so that they'll make good decisions, so that they'll know what's wise. Then make leaders responsible. Turn over to them the education of the two other groups. And through education, build a society so that workers and soldiers learn to use their intellect to control their desires and emotions. If you had all that, for Plato, you'd have a good or just society. Now, take that picture, that social political picture, and apply it to the individual person. You remember that soul, that it consists of three separate parts or faculties? Can you guess what they are? Desires, emotions, and intellect.
the characteristics associated with the three main groups of society. And can you guess how Plato defines a good or just person? Well, it's parallel to how he characterizes a good or just society. The three parts have to be in harmony in each of us. Our desires and emotions often get the better of us and lead us to do foolish things. They're in conflict with the intellect. So, to get them all to work together, to coexist in harmony, every person needs to be shaped in some way, in the same way that we've shaped society. Through the educational system, individuals must be educated to use their intellect to control their emotions and desires. That's harmony in the soul, and therefore results in a moral, good, or just person. What about other philosophical traditions, though? How do they define goodness? If we fast forward to the mid-18th century, we can see a clear difference in the way philosophers thought of goodness. At this time, we had Immanuel Kant and the philosophy of deontology. In deontology, the philosophy no longer examines the soul, but rather the actual acts that a person performs. Kant stated that a person is good based on two things. First, they act in a certain way out of duty, and second, the act that they perform is good on its own. What does this all mean? Let's start by examining his first point. Kant believes that a person is good if he acts out of duty. What does this mean? What is meant by duty exactly? Well, in Kant's terms, acting out of duty refers to acting out of respect for a moral law. This moral law has several characteristics. First, it's universal. Everyone has the option of acting in this way, even though not everybody will act in this way. It upholds human dignity. In this sense, the moral law ensures that people are not being used by others as a means for an end. Or, to put it more simply, the person taking an action is not simply using other people as a way to get what he wants so he can later throw them away like trash. Finally, the third characteristic, reciprocity. For this, an action should be seen as fair from all different perspectives. Therefore, if a person is following the moral law, their actions should have these three characteristics in them. If this is the case, they are acting out of duty. But acting out of duty is only half of the picture that contributes to a good person. Kant's second requirement for ensuring that a person is good is their acts to be good on their own. Something is considered good on its own when we can add it to a situation and it will not make it ethically worse. Now, you might have some idea of what might be good on its own. When asked to think of good things, many people will think of intelligence or persistence or even pleasure. However, Kant believed that such things are actually not good in themselves. For instance, while intelligence can be good and lead to positive acts, such as positive scientific discoveries, it can also produce negative results. We've all seen movies where an intelligent man or woman played a villain, and we've seen intelligence produce things such as nuclear weapons. Therefore, Kant stated that the only thing in the world that is truly good is goodwill. Or to put it in other words, the good intentions behind an act regardless of the consequences, since we can't control the consequences of our actions. Therefore, while Plato believed that goodness is based on the harmony of different parts of the soul, Kant believes that goodness is essentially based on the intentions behind individuals' actions and their relations to duty. Both of these philosophical traditions emphasize the importance of intellect and morality, where one must act out of rationality and in a way that upholds the moral law and look out for the good of others. They differ in one important characteristic. While Plato believes that goodness is a guarantee of happiness, Kant does not. Rather, he believed that goodness was necessary for deserving happiness. But we will talk about this more in our next class.
Please answer the questions found on the internet browser for this lecture. You will have 5 minutes to complete the questions before the next lecture starts. Submit your answers, but do not go beyond the next page until the following lecture is finished.